Hey kids, you know how England and France are a thing? Well, let me tell you about how one woman set the stage for almost a millennia of less than friendly banter between these two. How one woman birthed an empire only to see it burn to the ground herself. How one woman became the most powerful person on the continent and how she single-handedly shaped the future of Europe. A woman so influential and powerful, yet often forgotten in history just because she's a woman.
Eleanor of Aquitaine.
This woman is the real-life Queen of Thorns. And you better believe this is going to get really Game of Thronesy. Before we get into Eleanor's life, let me first tell you a bit about how women wielded power in medieval Europe. Because it's different compared to how men wielded power back then. Due to it being medieval times, women had about as much rights as you'd expect. That's why you wouldn't often see women going into battle, commanding massive armies, or conquering large swaths of land. That's more of a men's thing. Women didn't need to compensate for something, so their way of garnering power was a bit different. It's almost like a game of chess. Only you give birth to the pieces and you act from the shadows rather than the foreground. So now that we're all roughly on the same page, let's get into Eleanor's life. So Eleanor was born in the year of our Lord 1120 something. It's actually unclear when she was born, but most historians think it's 1124, and I'm too lazy to form my own opinion, so that's what we're going with. Now, Eleanor's youth isn't all that interesting. All you need to know is that due to the overall terribleness of medieval life, both her grandfather, brother and sister died, making the 8-year-old Eleanor the sole heir of Aquitaine, the largest region of France, a region that was larger than the domains held by the king around Paris. A couple of years later, Eleanor, now around 14 years old, was married off to said king, Louis VII of France. Now what you need to know about Louis VII is that he was severely autistic. I'm not talking your everyday run-of-the-mill Sheldon autism, I'm talking Warhammer 40k Imperial Fists level of autism. This guy was hyper-religious, even for medieval standards. Spending most of the day praying, only eating bread and water on Fridays, adhering to all religious rules, etc. That wouldn't be much of a problem were it not for his strict adherence to the rules surrounding, jousting in bed with your wife. This meant no air creating on any religious days, or on days that a woman has her monthly time of needing extra chocolate and love. In other words, they never fucked. This led to her only bearing 2 daughters and a miscarriage when Louis desperately wanted a son. Skipping ahead a bit. Louis got into some trouble when he accidentally pissed off the Pope by denying an archbishop entry into a city and was therefore excommunicated. This debacle was made worse by the fact that a little later he also burned down a cathedral filled with civilians who sheltered there for protection. This was a huge blow for the, and I cannot stress this enough, severely autistic and religious Louis. So he sought redemption by going on a crusade. And of course his wife had to come as well. Now the thing about crusades is, some of them almost didn't fail. Not this one failed almost immediately. The details aren't really important here. What's important was that by the time the crusade ended, Eleanor and Louis hated each other. So much that Eleanor wanted a divorce. This being medieval Europe, they didn't get one. But what they did get was marriage counseling from none other than the man with the fanciest hat in the world, the one, the only, Big Papa himself, the Pope. Who basically locked him into a room with nothing but a bed and what I can only assume are some romantic Roman chants to set the mood. It kinda worked and they did get back together. But it wasn't to last, and a year later they did get a divorce on the grounds of consanguinity, aka their family tree resembling more a circle than a tree. Before the ink on the divorce papers was even dry, Eleanor sent a message to Henry de Plantagenet of Normandy asking him to marry her. He accepted, and in no time the two were married. I have to add here that Henry was actually closer related to Eleanor than Louis. But hey, it's medieval Europe and morals wouldn't be invented for at least another 300 years, so who cares. Anyway, Henry wasn't just the Duke of Normandy, he was also heir to the English throne. So, when the English king died, this is what Eleanor and Henry's territory looked like. Now Henry was often busy doing whatever medieval kings do, so he left Eleanor in charge of ruling large swaths of his kingdom in these early years of him being king. When looking at their offspring, their marriage was very successful, with Eleanor bearing 5 sons and 3 daughters, and only one of them died in infancy, which is actually a pretty good survival rate for medieval standards. But don't let this impressive KD fool you. Eleanor and Henry fucking hated each other. Now what you need to know about the Plantagenet bloodline is that they had the nickname Devil's Brood, with there even being a legend that they descended from Satan himself. And it might as well have been true. The Plantagenets were known to be extremely impulsive, controlling and hot-headed. As for Henry himself, he was famously clumsy, somehow constantly ending up in bed with the wrong woman. This, unsurprisingly, angered Eleanor somewhat, and she was out for revenge. This opportunity came in 1173, when her sons revolted against their father. Now it's unclear whether or not the following actually happened, but it's rumored that she instigated this revolt by poisoning her sons against their father and convincing the lords of the south of France to support them. Several hundred years later, the rebellion failed and Eleanor sought refuge in a place none other than the realm of her ex-husband Louis. As you might have guessed, this failed rebellion by his own sons, possibly instigated by his own wife, had Henry fuming, and he had Eleanor arrested and imprisoned in England. Of course, Eleanor's prison wasn't a regular prison. She still lived a life of opulence and was released on special occasions like Christmas. You could see it more as the medieval equivalent of house arrest rather than an actual prison. During this time, Eleanor's son, Richard, led another rebellion against his father. This one had 2 reasons. Firstly, Henry wanted to sideline Richard as heir in favor of his younger brother John. And secondly, Henry was having an affair with Richard's fiancée, the Princess of France. Let me remind you here, Henry was Richard's father. Anyway, Richard, together with Philip II Augustus, the son of the severely autistic King Louis, they beat Henry and forced him to name Richard as his heir. A couple of days later, Henry caught a mild case of death. Richard was crowned king, and after 16 long years, Eleanor was finally freed. With Henry out of the picture, Eleanor was suddenly the most powerful person in all of Europe. While she did swear loyalty to Richard, it was more the other way around. While Richard did medieval king stuff on the European mainland, Eleanor ruled England. In the meantime, the Pope got bored and called for another crusade. And boy was Richard eager to participate. But if Richard was out crusading, who would rule his kingdom in his place? You'd say Eleanor. But no, she's a woman, and for some reason that wasn't possible. His younger brother John would have been the logical solution, but Richard didn't trust the conniving brat one bit. So instead he appointed the Archbishop of Ely, William de Longchamp, as Chief Justiciar and named his nephew Arthur as heir. Again sidelining John. Now Eleanor had the extremely important task of retrieving Richard's new fiancée, Berengaria of Navarro, and bringing her to Sicily. Why was this task important? Well, as you might know, Richard kinda already had a fiancée. The half-sister of the King of France. You know, the one his dad was fucking. And Eleanor had to convince the Spanish king that Richard really wanted to marry Berengaria instead of that French thought. Halfway through being Europe's most important delivery woman, she had to change course. Her other son, John, was being a bit of a power-hungry asshole, and the threat of civil war loomed over England. Eventually, the situation was diffused when Eleanor promised John that if Richard's marriage with Berengaria didn't produce a son, he would be the heir to the throne. This didn't give John any actual power, as he was sidelined again when Eleanor gave the reins to a different man, Walter de Coutances. John was of course pissed off because of this, and King Philip II Augustus of France took advantage of that, offering his half-sister's hand in marriage. Yes, the same one that was the ex-fiancée of Richard, and yes, the same one that was the ex-lover of their father. I told you guys this was very Game of Thronesy. Anyway, Eleanor had to break up that relation as well. A little while later, Richard had given up on the whole Crusade thingy and was on his way back when he got captured by Emperor Henry VI of the empire that is neither holy nor Roman, the Holy Roman Empire. For Richard's release, Henry demanded an astronomical sum of 150,000 marks. So, like any career politician, Eleanor went fundraising. Using her influence, she successfully raised the money and secured Richard's freedom. But the money alone wasn't enough. Richard had to swear fealty to Emperor Henry VII. Now, this exchange didn't have a great return on investment, since Richard and Berengaria never produced an heir, and only a couple of years later, Richard got Boromired. This meant that finally John's dream of being king was fulfilled. But of course, not everybody accepted John as king. The county of Anjou still saw Richard and John's nephew, Arthur, as the rightful heir. So Eleanor did some good old iron fisting and crushed the rebellion. She named John as her sole heir in return for the full sovereignty of Aquitaine for as long as she lived. To secure the security of Aquitaine, Eleanor swore fealty to the French king Philip II Augustus. And after doing one final delivery job of bringing her granddaughter to France to marry into the French royal family, she finally retired to the Fontevaux monastery. That is, until 15-year-old Arthur started doing the Plantagenet family tradition of messing things up and picking fights, and he had to be called to a halt. This pissed Arthur off, and in 1202 he and his army were besieging the castle Eleanor was hiding in, only to be crushed by John's army mere days later. Arthur was allegedly killed by John, which led to many nobles turning their backs on John. Which, fair enough, that guy literally killed a child. This would ultimately lead to John losing most of his French territories. But Eleanor wouldn't be around to see that happen. In 1204, at the age of 80, Eleanor passed away. She was buried next to her late husband Henry. And when you visit her grave, you can see that her grave is actually higher than that of Henry. A final show of who was actually the boss, and a fitting end for the mother of empires. Before ending this video, I want to give a little shout out to my grandma. She requested I make this video, dus oma, deze is voor u. For all those who aren't my grandma, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.